Greetings and welcome to another episode of our Black Gay Diaspora podcast. I'm your host, Eric. With over 10 years of experience in education, leadership, and consulting, this episode's guest, Jake Small. He is a researcher, nonprofit leader, advocate, keynote speaker, DEI workshop facilitator, and poet. Jake supports professionals at every level of seniority in companies across every industry. He's also about advancing the education equity of Black boys in the United States. This past May 2024, Jake published his collection of poems titled For Every Black Boy. I didn't just read the collection, I absorbed it. Jake is a talented poet, and I look forward to learning more about his professional journey and how he uses his credentials and experiences to celebrate and embrace who he is while guiding others. Hey, Jake, and welcome. How are you?
Hey, Eric. So good to be with you. I'm glad to jump into this conversation. And thank you so much for the introduction. I feel like you hit all the different pieces of my professional identity.
Oh, good. That's most important. Yeah. Before we started recording, I looked at your t-shirt. Is that an original design of yours?
This is not, no. So first of all, the t-shirt says Black men deserve to grow old. And it is, unfortunately, it is a political shirt, right? This is a politicized conversation. But when you look at the lives of Black men, especially Black men in urban environments across America, many of them are cut short. And so, yeah, this is a shirt that I was gifted, actually. I've postured my research and my work towards the success of Black men. And after I started making that known, people started giving me things that I can wear to sort of amplify the thoughts that I'm having and the research I'm pursuing. But no, not an original design.
Yeah, I know you're an illustrator, so I wasn't sure, but thanks for letting me know. And you just further whet my appetite for this conversation and highlighting the importance of what you do. Before we get going, where are you based?
So I'm based in Boston, Massachusetts, in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
That's the second time I've heard that. What does the Commonwealth mean?
Good question. And I don't feel exceptionally prepared to dive into the history on this call, but it does have to do with the history of colonization in America.
So we are recording at the beginning of the work week on a Tuesday. How's your week going so far?
Week is going well. I just received some exciting news. I've been invited to be a speaker at the Black Men in Education Convening, which is the nation's largest convening of Black male educators and advocates who support the diversification of the institution of education in this country. And so I've been invited to join specifically to lead a session called Queering the Black Classroom, where I'm going to talk about the ways in which I have historically brought in queer theory, feminist theory, and pieces of my queer self into the classroom and the ways in which I've seen that support student wellness, student belonging, and so forth. So yeah, the week is starting really, really well. Got some exciting news. This will be my second time going to the conference. I'm in Philadelphia every year in November. And so yeah, feeling good with this start to the week.
Congratulations. You said the second time. This is the first time you're speaking there?
So I spoke last year as well. In fact, the talk that I delivered titled Boys Go to Jupiter at this conference turned into my TED Talk. And so I owe the Black Men in Education Convening a great deal of gratitude for letting me practice this still very fresh and new topic before taking it to the TEDx stage.
Well, that would explain why you seem so natural on stage during that TEDx talk.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. So how do you identify under the LGBTQ plus umbrella?
Yeah, so I typically identify as queer, but for folks who I feel like know how to grapple with the nuance of the queer community, I share that I'm also bisexual. I use queer because my sexuality and also my gender identity feel like they're in a constant state of flux sometimes. I'm with a partner who I love dearly. We're in a same gender relationship. And so our relationship on the outside looks like a gay relationship. And so I go back and forth between using gay, bisexual, queer, and a lot of other words.
First of all, I want to start off by saying congratulations on the publication of your collection of poems.
Thank you so much.
Emotionally, how has that been for you?
Emotionally, yeah, let's start there. I mean, because some of the logistics of it all have been a bit stressful. So let's start with the emotions. The emotions are high. Writing, illustrating, and now releasing my first book, For Every Black Boy, has been the most healing journey I've given myself. To write down stories that I've just been grappling with in my mind or in therapy or with friends, to write them down into a book, to bound them, and then to deliver them to the people who are closest in my life, has been such a healing journey. Healing because I got to creatively grapple with some of these really traumatic moments, right? Like the first time I was pulled over by a police officer on the road, or the first time that I fell in love, or the first time that I really understood my place in my family's dynamic, right? I think all of these topics got to be teased out. These topics that have haunted me in some ways for years, I got to put down on paper. And so it's been healing. It's been radical. It's been transformative. I think it's helped me to show up as a better professional and partner and friend and son and uncle. It's helped me to be a better version of myself just by going through the writing and now publishing process.
Yeah, I will be honest. I'm not a big poetry person, but right away from the very first poem, even with your intro, but more so with the very first poem, I was like, oh, this person's deep. And that's the thing that I loved about it. And I related to so many of them. And yeah, I want to just read quickly. You start off the collection by saying it's a book I've been writing my entire life. And I just love the way you captured that. And then, yeah, thank you for sharing how like it has been for you emotionally. But you mentioned the logistics of it.
Oof. Let's get into it a little bit. Yeah, I mean, I made the decision to self-publish this first book, and that was a decision that I didn't make lightly. I was in conversation with a few different publishing agencies, and I guess the long and short of it all is that some folks wanted more jurisdiction. They wanted more oversight in my process than I was willing to give up. And so it made sense for me to self-publish, but that also meant that I had to figure out everything from bringing together an editor's council to help me make sure I was releasing the best version of my written work, bringing together some folks to edit and revise my visual illustrations, because as you know, there's several illustrations in the book as well. I had to think through, what does marketing look like? What does promotion look like? Who's my distributor? What is the feel of the book? Do I want a more matte or glossy finish? All of these things were things that I, at some points, wished I had someone in the publishing field to make decisions on my behalf. But I'm also at this point now glad. I'm glad that I know the ins and outs of this industry a little bit more. I think that this will not be my last time writing and releasing poetry or even more academic texts and literature. But now I know I can do it with a bit more confidence, having had gone through this process. And while we're talking about it, I can't say enough how grateful I am to have a community of people who have just volunteered their time, volunteered their wisdom, volunteered their brilliance to support me in this process, right? And my name is on the front cover, but it is the effort of dozens and dozens and dozens of people in my community that have helped us to get to this point of publishing and celebrating the work.
What is the saying? It takes a village.
It takes a village. It takes a village is right.
Yeah, and I have a background in graphic design. I did that for years professionally, and then also I write. So more so with the design, of course, the text was something that really grabbed me, but even the cover and having it all black, when I thought about it, I was like, I feel like that's intentional.
It was intentional. So I wanted folks to just jump right in. Right. I wanted folks to not feel like they were being lured in with the glitz and glam of a front page. I wanted also to be unapologetically clear with what was going on here, right? What's going on in this book. This book is for every Black boy, but hopefully it creates a world that anyone can find themselves in. Anyone who loves or has loved a Black boy in their life, their son, their child, their friend, their family member. Hopefully this is a book that draws in an audience that's much wider than just Black boys. But I also wanted to be clear that this is about boyhood. This is a book about Blackness. And what's not said in the front cover is, as much as it is an exploration of boyhood, manhood, Blackness, it's also an exploration of love. And that's why there are so many poems that touch on that motif and that theme of love. And like you mentioned, the very first offering in the book is titled Love, because it really is a love letter to, it's a love letter to myself. It's a love letter to every Black boy that exists, including the ones that exist inside of every Black man. And so hopefully that all comes through in the poems and the short stories and the illustrations as well.
I definitely feel the passion in what you just shared right now, but also in the collection itself. Yeah, just the importance of it. But I want to ask you, like, which was the first poem that you wrote for it?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that, and I've been trying to figure it out because as you mentioned in the about the book, I mentioned that I've been writing this poem for my entire life. And that's because the poems are inspired by experiences that I've been having for my entire life. And so I went through recently and tried to figure out exactly which was the first one. And it's between two poems that I know were both written in middle school when I was just a preteen. And then also this poem is about directions. And you'll see that there's some similar themes in both of those. Themes of family, themes of power and strength and community, but also some really heavy themes of self-harm and suicidal ideation. These were things that I was grappling with as a 13, 14, 15-year-old. And so it's not a surprise to me to see that those themes are coming through in these poems that I've chosen to include. I knew that I had to bring in poetry that I had written just a couple of months ago, as well as poetry that I've written now, a decade ago. That was important for me because this book it's an archival moment of my life. It's where I am at this point, but also where I've been in every point before today. And so, yeah, the earliest contributions were written when I was just just a teenager.
The evolution of who you are, up to this moment. But a few of my favorites so far are Love, Guitar. I love that one. I love the illustration too. A Lesson, Damage, and then What Makes Us a Family. I asked you about the first one, but is there one that is closest to your heart right now?
And it changes. It definitely changes. But What Makes Us Family is incredibly close to my heart because I'm thinking about what family means. My sister, just about 8 months ago, welcomed her first child into this world, a little Black girl who I love so, so much, who I get to call my niece, who I get to watch turn into a brilliant, beautiful, intelligent, powerful young woman. And so I'm thinking about family a lot. I'm also having conversations with my partner about what our family looks like and what it could look like in the future. And so this one was really written intentionally to talk about family as something more expansive than just those who might share your blood. And so there's a line in that poem that says, "And there's something about you that makes us family," right? And it leaves readers in that place of being unsure and being uncertain, right? Because family, it can be built in such intentional ways. And we talk about chosen family, especially in the queer community. We talk about chosen family as those who we've chosen to keep around us, right? Friends who have turned into something that's a bit more intimate than just an average platonic relationship. And so that one really, really sits on my heart. But also there's a short story by the name of Preschool. And it's about my relationship with my oldest brother. And, he and I have had an evolution of our relationship over the years. He's about 10 years older than me. And in this short story, I'm talking about some advice that he's given me. And I'm talking about the ways in which I want to use his advice intentionally, not just as a child, right, which is sort of the timeline where the short story is taking place, but also as a young adult, also as a professional in the workforce. That advice really stuck with me, and it's advice about how to find and secure knowledge, which I think is really powerful even to this day.
That was another of my favorites because I remember you were starting preschool and his advice was something about your brain. Yeah.
He talked about the brain almost as like a bucket, right? This empty vessel. And he said, whichever brain you pick, you'll be stuck with for the rest of your life. And so find a good one. And he's saying this as maybe a 14 or 15-year-old, and I'm 4 or 5 years old, and I'm listening because he's my oldest brother. Of course, he knows what he's talking about. And then your job will be, for as long as you live, to fill it up with knowledge, information, wisdom, and then share that out with people who you love and who you trust and who are deserving of your knowledge and your brilliance. Of course, he's funny, he's heartfelt. John is He's one of my most instructive teachers as my oldest brother, and one of the strongest demonstrations of leadership that I've ever seen. And he's a goofball at times.
Another thing that stood out to me, I don't know how much of that was part of the process of creating the collection, but using Black instead of African American. Was that something that was a conscious thought process?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I'm African American. Because of colonization in this country, because of white supremacy culture, because of the history of the transatlantic slave trade, there has been a disappearing of my connection to Africa. There's been an erasure of the relationship that I, as a Black person in America, am told that I can have with the continent of Africa and the individual countries within. I hold a connection to being African American. Whenever I'm filling out a resume or a job application or a legal or medical document, I'm probably checking the African American box. My relationship with my Blackness is one that's more social, it's more familial, it's more casual at times, and also a bit more poignant. My Blackness connects me not just to these folks in America who have probably a similar history and lineage to me. My Blackness connects me to the entire globe, where Black and brown people are the global majority. My Blackness connects me to people in places outside of this country and outside of a singular way of thought. And so my Blackness is really something that I hold in a very sacred way. I've always been sort of disappointed in the relationship between Blackness and being African American, right? I think a lot of people use African American as a politically correct, and I put that in air quotes, version of Black. My partner, he is a Black man, a monoracial, single race Black man, but he is not African American. His parents are both Guyanese immigrants to this country. I get frustrated when my Caribbean American or Caribbean friends get called African American, especially by white folks who are just trying to avoid the word Black. Like, I am Black and I am beautiful, and my Blackness is all throughout me. I don't like how those two words get conflated sometimes, and so I choose to use the word Black.
I like your take on that. I asked that question too because I came of age when it was Black, a pride. And like you said, Black is not the color, it's the culture. It's the things that we contribute to American society. It's the thing of me being outside of the US and seeing Black American influence globally. And nothing that should ever be minimized or reduced.
Right, for sure. Right, I like the way that you phrase that. Right, my Blackness is the music I listen to. It's the language I use. It's the food I eat. It's the people who I surround myself with. Black is the poetry in my book. Right, it's all of those things. And so I do have a deep, intimate relationship with Black as a culture, not just a color.
To tie in with your poetry collection called For Every Black Boy, I love your TEDx talk called How to Teach Black Boys They Matter. I was enlightened by and could relate to. When did you first conceive of that talk? You kind of referenced it, I think, a little bit in the beginning, but if you could just kind of further explain.
Like I mentioned before, I was preparing for the nation's largest convening of Black male educators, the Black Men in Education convening, which happens in Philly every year in November. And I was trying to figure out how to make sense of all these statistics I was reading. I was trying to make sense of these statistics that said 40% of Black men who start a college degree will finish it within 6 years. Only 40%. I was trying to make sense of the statistics about incarceration as well. The fact that 1 in 4 Black men in this country will spend time behind bars before he is 40 years old. 25% of us. I knew that they were related. I knew that these concepts were interconnected, but I just didn't really know how. I forget what reminded me of this playground saying. Girls go to college to get more knowledge, boys go to Jupiter to get more stupider. I was reminded of this playful playground saying, and it really supercharged me to make sense of this whole pipeline issue, right? To make sense of how we know that from the moment a Black boy is born, he will likely be the most likely student in his class to get suspended or expelled. He will have a hard time graduating from high school, an even harder time getting into college. He probably won't get an advanced degree. His earning potential will stay at X rate per year, right? We knew so much about Black boys, so much of the story of who a Black boy was written before we were even speaking. That also sort of challenged me. It haunted me. And so my TED Talk was born out of all of this rage. It was born out of all of this discomfort. And through a lot of prayer and conversations with friends and family, I learned that love, this thing we always talk about, can be and is a tangible and practicable tool. It's not just something you feel inside of you. It's something that you can leverage to empower young people, to empower your community, to uplift people whose backs are up against the wall. Before preparing for this TED Talk, my brain was split in two different directions. It was, okay, there has to be some academic response to these huge policy issues. There's this major infringement on Black lives and Black rights and Black justice. So the answer must live in that same space of literature and academics and, research and all of that. And then there was the other side of my brain, which said, love feels really nice. Love feels really good. Love makes me smile. Love makes me happy. Love is why I check on my mom and my dad, and it's why I reach out to my sister. Love is why I'm so excited whenever my partner comes home from work. Love is such a powerful force. What if it is the answer to all of these things? And so I did some research and I found the authorship of Dr. Roderick Carey, who's one of the main authors of literature when it comes to the theory of mattering, which exists under this umbrella of sense of belonging research. But this theory of mattering is really this theory of how we share love between and amongst each other to uplift and empower people in the most simple way, right? And so, this was really born out of a frustration with the statistics I was reading and this realization that love can be employed as a tool for empowerment and enrichment.
I would say for me, the title was debate, and the question of how many Black male teachers did we have throughout our K through 12 years. That was like the hook. It got me to thinking, and mine was fifth grade Mr. Shelton, who was actually one of my favorite teachers. I know yours was Dr. Peter Archer, who is the inspiration behind the main character in the Pixar film Soul. It's huge. Did your research uncover the reasons why there is a scarcity of Black male teachers in our educational system?
The reason is multi-layered. Of course, it's nuanced. It's systemic. It's infrastructural. It's not as simple as Black men don't want to be teachers. It's not as simple as Black men aren't smart enough to be teachers. It's not as simple as Black men can't do this work. And I bring those things up because depending on what circles you occupy, those might be narratives that you hear about Black men. I mean, there's the issue of on-ramps. When I was in my Master's of Education program at the University of Vermont, I was one of only 2 Black men in my cohort. And this was a program designed to create the next generation of higher education leaders, right? When you look across the board, so many master's programs and teacher preparation programs are suffering with this over-representation of white folks and under-representation of Black folks. It's the on-ramps and getting the preparation to become a teacher. It's the retention, right? Black folks, unfortunately, especially in places that are predominantly white-bodied and white-serving, Black folks can feel and experience lots of racialized trauma in the workforce. That means in the classroom. That means in the break room of a schoolhouse. That means across the board, right? And so it's not just that not enough Black men are getting into the teacher preparation programs and then not getting hired. It's that once they're there, it can be a very traumatic or even violent workplace, which means that there's high attrition rates for Black men in education. They're leaving year after year much quicker than their white counterparts or peers. And so it's all of these different things. It's a policy issue. It's legislative issues. It's also sociocultural issues. If you look and sound and love and pray and behave differently, it's easy to feel isolated, right? And that isolation leads to leaving the field of education altogether. And so it's a lot of issues. It's a lot of issues, but also there are people in this nation and beyond who are actively trying to regress our work towards education equity. They are huge opponents when it comes to educational justice. When you look across the nation, there are hundreds of book bans. There are hundreds of anti-trans bills in Congress. I bring up trans rights and queer rights because all of this stuff is interconnected. The liberation of women, the liberation of non-binary folks, the liberation of queer folks in general, all of that works towards the liberation of Black folks as well, obviously. I know that you're deeply familiar with the intersectionality of these identities. And when we can all be liberated, that's when justice really occurs.
In citing the rates of high school and college completion for Black American males, what are some of the ways that we can increase this for Black males?
I think that we need better narratives. I am an educator, but also my academic background is in communication studies, and I think a lot about messaging and whose voices are amplified and whose voices are muted, which stories are disappeared and which ones are put onto billboards. We need better messaging. And so I'd like to be a voice that says we not only need Black men to finish their own schooling as a community good and an intrapersonal good, we also need more Black men in the field of education because it not only supports Black students, it supports all students. We all benefit when Black men know that they matter and know that they matter in the field of education. Education, access to high quality education is one of the key determinants for long-term professional success and personal health, right? We live longer. We live happier lives when we have access to high quality education. This has been studied and reported on. Also, having just one Black male teacher in any student's life, regardless of race or gender or ethnicity, makes the student better when it comes to multicultural competency, identity consciousness, makes them more attuned to differences and empathy, right? And so it's so important, not just that Black men have access to the highest levels of education, but also hear more stories about the need for Black men in the field of education. We need more Black men in the field of education. And there are some organizations who are doing incredible work to catalyze that effort. It has to happen. And I think that we're seeing some of the greatest opponents of that messaging as well.
I just flashed to a memory in college. My other Black male teacher, I'm from Phoenix. I was going to school in Tucson. I had signed up for the African Americans, I think it was called that, studies course. I was prepared to show up and be surrounded by a sea of Black people. And I was one of, I think, 5 Black kids in that class. And the thing about you said about messaging, he put a question out. He asked, like, how many of you assume that all the Black kids on this campus are here because of scholarships through affirmative action? He got them to be honest, and most of them said, well, we assume all of them are. And just so happened, all 5 of us were kids who were there because of our grades and also there because we were working part-time to pay for our schooling.
Yeah. So, I mean, these stories, right, even when they are untrue, and even when we counter a story with statistics and data, what people have heard and learned to be true, it can be so deeply ingrained. And so, even in the face of a counter narrative, the dominant narrative still spurs up emotion and leads to action.
For those of us who are not educators or parents, what are some of the ways that we can help?
So I think that we need to approach the way we think about education with a broader pair of glasses, if you will. Education is not just the schoolhouse. It's not just the teachers and administrators. It's also all of these other organizations and individuals who are supporting the next generation of learners in this country, right? So when I think about nonprofit organizations that are education adjacent, those are really huge. Those are really important. When you think about legislators and policymakers in local government, like those folks are doing a lot of work to decide what curriculum and teaching practices look like. So what can folks do who aren't parents or educators? they can understand the importance, commit to understanding the importance of high quality education and the ways in which that changes a student's life. There are tons and tons of local ways to get involved in one's community, whether that's volunteering to be a part of or just to support the school board or school committee, which many people don't know. In some counties and areas are elected positions. Many are elected positions. Some are appointed positions. And the school board or the school committee decides who the superintendent is going to be. It decides how the budget's going to get dispersed. It decides which textbooks they're going to purchase. It decides all of these things that impact every single student in that district. And it's not necessarily an educator role. For example, I live in Chelsea, which is a small city just north of Boston, but a part of the greater Boston area. On the school board, I think there's only 2 or 3 folks who have in-classroom experience with teaching. I think we need more lawyers and public servants to be thinking about education, right? Because it touches all of our lives. We all have a perspective that needs to be poured into this central well of wisdom so that we can create a more ambitious freedom dream when it comes to education. And I think that once we're all working towards improving the education system, then we'll arrive at a better outcome for sure.
Another thing it raised for me is your talk was how it affects generational wealth for us.
These conversations about education, entering the workforce, and building wealth, buying a home, or saving for retirement, these are all interconnected. And it actually starts before we're even born, right? It starts like this piece that you're mentioning, intergenerational wealth. It starts with how our parents and our grandparents and our great-grandparents are able to navigate through society. If you are a first-generation college goer, that also means that you're the first person to enter the workforce with a college education, which means that your earning potential is at a different place from the rest of your familial peers. And so I'm an educator, but I've spent a lot of my career working in career education. I'm helping folks to find internships and jobs and to start their career or to maintain their career or transition between one career to another. And that's because I think that education, when done right, should be a tool to prepare young people for the world of work, but also for the world.
You referenced your brother earlier, and one of the things that I really liked in the talk is that you talked about your 3 nephews and your parents and those relationships and how those have helped to make you who you are today, who we see today. Are you and your partner thinking about starting your own family in that sense?
Yeah, good question. So I'm 26 years old. I, fingers crossed, knock on wood, have a long life ahead of me. I haven't made any decisions about formally becoming a parent plays into that. But I know that I do, quote unquote, father a lot of children, either through mentorship or through advice or counsel. One of my greatest and most important identities as a person is being an uncle, because my nephews and my nieces and all of the folks who aren't in my blood family, but who I call nephews and nieces and cousins, they're all people who I can teach and learn from, who I can imprint and who I can help expose to the world. I'll continue to look at fatherhood as a more expanded identity than just traditionally fathering a child. I think that our nation need strong leaders, and whatever those leaders look like, whatever those leaders talk like, they need to be people who our young people feel connected to. And so I always start not with instruction, but with compassion.
We spent some time talking about your poetry, your illustrations, your TEDx talk, but you're also a keynote speaker and a DEI facilitator. Can you share with us about those professions?
I absolutely love the opportunity I get to interrogate these big questions, especially ones that are about identity consciousness or identity or justice or equity. I love interrogating these ideas. I also love supporting others in their own interrogation of these big concepts. And so as a DEI facilitator, I lead workshops for sometimes small groups of 4 or 5 managers at a company. Sometimes larger groups at like a conference. I might reach 1,000 or 2,000 people all in one address. And whenever I get an opportunity, whenever I get a platform to share my ideas with anyone, again, like I mentioned before, my goal is to build compassion, not necessarily always to build comprehension, right? I think that we've heard a lot of these buzzwords: diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. A lot of these words get talked about a lot. And so sometimes I don't even use those words in my work. Sometimes I use the language of love, and I use the language of compassion and empathy as a proxy for these bigger conversations about social justice and inclusion policy. It gets at the same goal, which is ensuring that people have at least one new tool to engage with the world from a more inclusive lens. More specifically, to answer your question, I'm both balancing these workshops and keynote opportunities and consulting clients with running the business as a self-employed and independent consultant. And I love both sides of it. I will always be an educator, even if I don't always work in the field of education.
What I feel is wherever you're at, personally or professionally, is that you're the seeker of the truth and you're always soaking up knowledge.
That's definitely the goal. I love to learn. I love to learn. And in this last year, I've had a reckoning. I've realized a new privilege that I hold. I've been interrogating lately how easy or hard it's been for me to navigate schools and classrooms and interactions with teachers. I am privileged in that my mind is sort of wired in a way that fits into the American education system. I've never had to work too incredibly hard to keep good grades in school. And so I feel like it's my duty to learn as much as I can about this institution and then give people the tools they need to reimagine it. I'm getting ready to start applying for doctoral programs, specifically so that I can pursue research on the academic and professional success of Black boys and Black men in American public education schools and settings. And I think that through my research there, I'll be able to not just help Black boys, but also help other students, especially those who hold racially minoritized identities.
This is a question I had that just in seeing your TEDx talk, and even more so with this conversation, is in my perception is you're a naturally gifted speaker, but how much of it is training and how much of it is just your innate gift for speaking?
I owe so much of who I am, personally, professionally, spiritually, etc., to my ancestors. And when I say ancestors, I mean, of course, the people who are in my family, but also people who have shared my experiences. And I'll share more about that in a moment. I'm also privileged to come from a long line of not just highly educated Black folks, but Black educators. And in my TED Talk, I mentioned my great-grandmother, who was the first in our family to pursue an advanced degree. I'm sitting with so much gratitude for people who I never got a chance to meet. It's wisdom that was passed down from my ancestors. My ancestors are not just people in my family, they're also people who have shared experiences. I think about so many queer ancestors, specifically Black queer ancestors. The conversation about Black boyhood or Black queer liberation, these are not just trendy for me. They're trendy for a lot of people. They're trendy for a lot of political pundits and policy advisors and so forth, but they're not trendy for me. This is my livelihood. These conversations are about my life. They're about the people who I care the most about in this world. I treat them with a reverence that they're due.
Where did we come from and how can we keep that and go higher?
Unfortunately, educators and social workers in America are the lowest paid master's degree required professionals in the workforce. They are not high wage careers at all. None of us enter this field because we want to make a bunch of money. We also have to talk about high impact. And educators and social workers are some of the most high impact professionals who I've ever experienced in society. As an educator, that's why I use poetry. It's because it's one of the few places where you can, as an adult, as a professional, still just exist in the make-believe, the space of creation and ideation. There's a poet and performing artist by the name of Alok. And Alok is absolutely incredible, a trans femme scholar, researcher, and performing artist. And I take a lot of inspiration from them. And they say that when you're writing poetry, you don't have to make sense. The goal is to make sensation. We want to create things that evoke the spirit and compel action in some way. And all of that gets tied in to my relationship with the field of education.
Who was Jake growing up?
What age?
7.
7. Okay. My day typically would start with being woken up by my mom and getting ready for school with my older siblings. I'm one of 5, and so I had lots of footsteps to follow, both physically to school, but also in terms of how to show up. My parents kept me busy. I was always interested in learning, but I was also always interested in arts and crafts, arts and creativity. I was always asking these sorts of questions. And luckily now I've made it a part of my professional identity to be a question asker and to answer some of the world's biggest questions, especially with some of these workshops that I do with organizations. And so, yeah, that's who I was as a child. Very active, very engaged.
It sounds like that inquisitiveness was supported by the loved ones surrounding you.
Oh, certainly. They inquired about not just my outcome, but my process.
Going back briefly to the TEDx talk, telling our Black boys that they're handsome, that they're attractive. I think you mentioned that in your talk. We're not always used to hearing that.
My grandmother, who, it didn't matter if I had a pimple on my face or if I had just gotten my eyebrows threaded and I was looking real cute and handsome. No matter what, she would say, you look good. You look sharp. You look fresh. And it didn't matter how my body physically looked. What she was actually commenting on was my spirit, right? She knew more about me than I could potentially ever learn about myself. She made me believe that I was beautiful, that I was perfect.
Oh gosh, I am not wearing makeup. I'm more afraid to cry on camera, but that wouldn't hit me. That's beautiful. That's really beautiful. Thank you for that. Thank you.
There's a lot of people who I've thought of during this conversation who I'm going to have to text after our call and just say I love you. Like a lot of Black men who I got to just text, I love you, Black man. Like, I love you. Like, you're beautiful. You're incredible. So thank you, too, for this conversation.
When did you realize you were different as far as being beautifully unique under the LGBTQ plus umbrella?
So one thing I left out about sort of who I was at age 7, I think that I had my first same gender crush when I was in 2nd grade, 7 years old. I had a friend who I always wanted to hang out with, and he loved soccer. And I didn't like soccer because I was a chubby kid and it involved a lot of running around. But when he told me that he loved soccer, I stopped everything and I went to go play with him. And that should have been, I think, maybe, something to sing to my heart and say, hey, listen, maybe you like people of the same gender. But the first time I said out loud, you're queer, like you are a queer person. We are, I think that probably was like 8th or 9th grade. And I remember looking at myself in the upstairs bathroom of my childhood home and breaking down in tears. I don't do a lot of crying, not by myself or with other people. I'm just not a big crier. But I looked at myself in the mirror and I said, you are queer. And I was weeping and sobbing. And then I took a deep breath and I wiped my tears and I went back outside to my family. And I didn't tell them that I was queer until I started college. I'd come out to myself and I held that for several years afterwards. Always in the back of my mind was like, well, how is this going to impact my family? How's it going to impact my schooling? How's it going to impact, the friends I can make and the jobs I can apply for? How's it going to impact all these things that I've never seen Black queer men do, right? I didn't know that we could be Black men who were also queer. I hadn't seen enough examples. I haven't been exposed to enough narratives. But then I started college. At orientation, we had a number of people speak with us, one of which was a student. And that student was the student body president who had just finished his senior year. So he'd graduated. They brought him back for orientation just to inspire and motivate the students. And he was a Black queer man. We can be the president of the student body? We can do that? The first person I ever came out to was my grandmother. And she, in her last few years alive, struggle with Parkinson's. A lot of people with Parkinson's have really bad tremors, but also affects memory. And so I figured, because my grandmother most days would call me by my uncle's name, I figured she was a safe person to come out to. I said, "Grandmommy, I'm bisexual." And she sort of closed her eyes and rocked back and forth and hummed a little song for about 10 or 15 minutes. And I thought that she had fallen asleep or forgotten about what I said. And so I sort of like nudged her knee and I said, "Grandmommy, did you hear me?" And she said, "I heard you." And she said, "Well, I know two other things are true. I still love you, and I know that God still loves you." And for her to say God still loves you, I was like, I don't need anyone else to accept me or claim me. If Grandmommy knows this thing about me and she still loves me, then I'm good. She also is the reason why I write my name in all capital letters. She, with her tremors, really couldn't steady her hand too well. It would take her an hour sometimes to write a sentence. It was easier for her to write my name in all capital letters. And because she's taught me more about myself than I have yet learned, I wear my name in the way that I wear it, in the way that I write it, as a way to honor her and all of her brilliance and all of her magic.
Wow. Wow. Second grade, my crush was Byron. I didn't call it that, but I was conscious enough to know, or aware enough to know, that it was something I shouldn't share with other people. I was a lot older when I finally acknowledged that within myself. And
people talk about, especially in the queer community, that you never really stop having to come out. You might be at a new job or in a new place and someone asks you about, "Oh, are you married? Do you have a wife and kids?" It's like, okay, now I have to either live in this lie or come out to you. I have a question for you. Does coming out, do we stop? Do we stop coming out? Does it get easier?
I like that question. Thank you. And it's more my own comfort level. I think it's more, which is this whole conversation is making sure that I'm taking care of myself, which doesn't mean I have to say it if I don't feel it in the moment, so that I can protect my emotional and my mental well-being and still the realities of the physical safety. I definitely don't want to be that person I was before that pretends.
I like that you bring up self-care, but then talk about being honest. I don't want to lie to you because it would hurt you. I don't want to lie to you because you'll feel a lack of trust. But talking about being honest as a form of self-care, I love that. It is a burden. It is exhausting to carry around a lie, not for the other person, but for myself. I appreciate that framing.
For anyone of us who are interested in advocacy for Black males, what can you recommend?
I think when it comes to advocacy across the board, for any group that's been marginalized, start small. Start with your own actions, behaviors, and beliefs. Start by reading. If you're looking for a couple of good ones lately, I've been really, really engaged with two authors. One, Richard Wright, who's the author of Black Boy. The other one is Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum, who authored the book, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together at the Cafeteria Table? It's a really cool exploration of Blackness and racialized experiences, but also talks about education. And then from there, don't focus on comprehension. You don't need to learn all of the words to be the perfect ally. Start with compassion. Build up a resilience for being uncomfortable. Any good advocacy work will require you to step out of your comfort zone. It will require you to expand your thinking. It will require you to imagine a world that you previously didn't think could exist. For a lot of people who get to navigate the world with white privilege, they can't imagine how taxing constant microaggressions and racialized experiences can be. But just for a moment, suspend any disbelief that you might have and listen to the people who are experiencing the harm, the trauma, and then try to build your resilience for that hard conversation and your compassion for their humanity. Even if you are some expert DEI leader, go back to that ever so often to remind yourself. If it has to do with saying the right thing, showing up to the right rally, or going to the right parade, that's not really what it's about, right? Those are all I think, about like comprehension. It shouldn't be about, oh, I have to get the pronouns right or else I'm a bad person. No, it should be, I care about your humanity. And so I'm going to do whatever I can to ensure that you feel safe.
To wind us down, I always end with asking, do you have any final thoughts or insight? And before that, I just want to say this has just been an amazing conversation. So I just want to say thank you for that. But yeah, do you have any final thoughts or insight?
Thank you too. This has been great. This is only our second time getting to chat on a call. And so I'm really grateful to have this conversation and to unpack some of these concepts. If you're listening and this is your first time engaging with me or my work, please follow me on LinkedIn or check out my other projects. You can find more information about me at imjakesmall.com. You can learn more about the book at foreveryblackboy.org. And the big call to action I have for anyone who's listening is do something. Do something with what you've heard here today. That something can be as small as opening up your journal and reflecting on some of the concepts that we discussed, whether it's a piece of wisdom you learned, a new word that you heard, or just something that what you heard made you think. Write it down, digest it, contend with it, grapple with it, do whatever you need to do. If you're something after this call involves other people, maybe it's sending them the link to this episode, maybe it's asking someone how they're doing, or it's checking on a Black boy or a Black man in your life, because sometimes we get hurt and we don't always have the spaces to heal our wounds. So ask how you can help.
Thank you for spending time with us. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, comment, and subscribe. Share with your friends too. You can also follow us on Instagram at Our Black Gay Diaspora and on Twitter at BLK Gay Diaspora. Until next time.